Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us.
And welcome back to another episode of Socializing Security. I'm going solo this morning because, let's be real, when we talk about GRC, that's my thing. So we are going to have an incredible interview session today with Perry Correll, as well as Brian and myself, and we're going to be talking about the many hats of data governance. But I wanted to jump in today and, instead of doing our normal, hey, how's it going? I wanted to just dive right in and talk about what are we talking about when we say data governance? Because I will say, as a compliance officer, I find it kind of frustrating. It's basically compliance, but we've rebranded and renamed, which, to be fair, in my industry, we do that all the time. It used to be information security program, and then it was compliance program, and then it turned into trust program, and now it's like compliance security trust. Also, then we also have something called data governance, which is a part of compliance, but it's actually, I think the reason they really rebranded it is because it has a larger scope. So generally, when we're talking about information security compliance, we're familiar with the idea of having security, like SecOps. We're having, compliance, legal, maybe a little bit of HR, IT, of course, and then engineering. Data governance is really meant to be thinking about it more from the highest level possible. As really, again, we talk about this in the compliance space. It's called top down, where we're talking about if we really want to be governing data in a secure, compliant, and controlled fashion, we need to be thinking about it at the highest level. It operates very similarly to risk management, right? Risk management is a part of compliance, is a part of information security, but is generally called enterprise risk management because, again, it sits at the highest level. There could be risks within a risk register that have nothing to do with security and have everything to do with cash flow from the finance side, or have, is an HR specific risk when we're talking about a risk of hiring employees offshore or something like that. So data governance, I think, is meant to be more at the enterprise level in the same way that risk management does. So just trying to familiarize yourself so we're all talking about the same thing. But I really did want to take some time before we introduce Perry and what we're going to talk about today. I just wanted to set the scene of what are we talking about when we're talking about data governance. But before I get into the dictionary definition, I want to just kick off of what we're planning on doing. This episode is going to be a little bit of a special edition episode. We have Perry Correll joining us from Correll, and I saw him speak at an event at Innotech in Austin, and he was talking about data governance, and he did it in a really fun, exciting, and engaging way, which as a compliance officer is a really refreshing thing to see, because I try to do that when I talk about compliance and security, but very often in our industry when we're talking about, things that most people think are boring, honestly. He did it with light, happiness, and fun. And so that was really why we wanted to absolutely socialize with him here on the podcast. But also, I thought it would be fun for us to do a little bit of a special edition episode. So our plan is to do a little bit more of a tabletop exercise where Brian, myself, and Perry are really going to be wearing different hats within an organization. The three of us, I think, have had almost every job within a technology organization. So we can really talk the talk for a lot of different stakeholders. And so our intention today is really to be kind of popcorning and being like, okay, Milu, if you're representing legal, what are your concerns from a data governance perspective? Versus Brian, if you're talking about IT, or Perry, if you're talking engineering, and really kind of popcorning it and really trying to create I'm hoping will be a tabletop exercise about what do we mean when we bring all of these different stakeholders in the room and say, we're going to build a data governance program. What should each of us care about? So that's the goal for today's episode, but really to set the scene, I just want to talk about what is data governance. So according to the NIST website, NIST, which is the National Institute for Scientific Technologies, I believe, I might need to fact check myself on that one, but it is the US standard really that's setting a lot of the security control framework. So NIST is the governing body that has created FedRAMP, what we're familiar with NIST Special Publication 853 and 871. So NIST defines data governance as a set of processes that ensures that the data assets are formally managed throughout the enterprise. A data governance model establishes authority and management and decision-making parameters related to the data produced or managed by the enterprise. I read that and I still don't really know what they mean. in the sense that I'm familiar with a lot of those words, and I understand that we're talking about managing data assets at the enterprise level. So we're creating a governing body or a governance model where we want to think about every data asset that we have and come up with a plan and a strategy to secure that information to make sure we're complying with our regulatory requirements and doing it thoughtfully. And when we're talking about a data asset, could be customer data, could be employee data, could be information that you have access to, right? Confidential information could be a data asset that's different, right? Even just managing your customer contracts, that could be considered a data asset that you need to protect differently, for example, because the data retention requirements are longer. So that's really what we're thinking about, is bringing the right people in the room within an organization and setting up an enterprise level approach, a top-down approach of managing data assets and thinking through how are we doing this and where are the risks, the concerns, and the wins that we can do this to create a strategy so that IT isn't doing one thing versus HR is doing another versus compliance, legal, engineering. They're all doing different things, using different system. Data is everywhere, right? That's the worst case scenario. And that's a very common tune, especially in the startup space. If we add to that, there are special requirements. There's a security control in the FedRAMP special publication, which is 853. I believe it's Project Management Control 23, PM 23, which actually requires organizations to establish a data governance body, which is consisting of defined roles and responsibilities. And they have supplemental guidance that's actually helpful for our conversation today, where it says the data governance body establishes policies, procedures, and standards that facilitate data governance so that data, including personally identifiable information, is effectively managed and maintained in accordance with applicable laws, executive orders, directives, regulations, policy standards, and guidance. That to me is the most helpful thing of what that actually means. Is really, it's the framework that the organization is using to effectively manage data in compliance with all laws, regulations, customer expectations, contractual obligations, and also just hopefully doing the right thing. That sounds similar to what a compliance program is. If you think about an organization's governance, risk, and compliance program, GRC, very often they are established to create policies, procedures, and standards that facilitate policies or facilitate programs that help the organization comply with applicable laws, orders, regulations, contractual obligations, and customer expectations, right? Industry standards. So data governance can be a part of compliance, can also be its own thing. So that's just kind of why I wanted to set the scene today as kind of the GRC person in the room of saying, hey, yeah, data governance is excellent. It is still a part of compliance because it's very similar. Those two governing bodies, you hear governance as a part of GRC, right? Governance, risk, and compliance. So it would make a lot of sense for data governance to sit within a compliance organization, but that does not mean that they are the only stakeholder. And that's really what we're hoping to illuminate today in our conversation, is that each individual department within an organization has different concerns and priorities about the data that they have access to. And so we want to really popcorn today and bring on Perry as an additional expert. Really, he's an expert in data governance. So he's the perfect person to have us join on today's episode of listing through what are the concerns that marketing might have for data versus IT versus compliance versus security. And we're going to pick a couple and we're going to hopefully go through them all. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. But before we kick that off, I want to just take some time to introduce Perry. I told you that I met him at Innotech in Austin a couple months ago, and I honestly was the obnoxious person that was asking all the questions in his session because it was so compelling. It was about data governance, and he was really excited to talk about what his team is doing at Cribble. He is currently a director at Cribble, and he also says he is the observability professor. Sorry, that's a hard word, observability professor. But he has a long-standing background as a technologist and has some really, really impressive organizations and has held many, many different roles as, he was at the U.S. Air Force and then went into engineering and then turned into moving into technology. So did some marketing work, also was a principal technologist, director of product marketing. He's done that for many different companies, and now he's a director at Cribble. And he gets to be, similarly to some of the security evangelists that we've talked about, he really focuses on observability and data governance. So that's what he really is the evangelist for. So we're really lucky to have him joining us for this conversation today. He's also a wonderful human being. So I'm very grateful that I got to meet him in person. Even better that I got to convince him to join us here and socialize with us about data governance. So without further ado, let's kick off this special edition episode. We'll bring on Brian and Perry, and then the three of us will be popcorning and wearing different hats for today's episode. So I can't wait to kick it off. And we're back to this special edition episode of Socializing Security. Perry, can you say hi and introduce us a little bit?
Hi, everybody. My name is Perry Correll, and I've got a long background in networking. As a matter of fact, I started when it was thicknet and thinnet Ethernet, so it kind of goes back that far. And when security wasn't such a big deal back then. It was just trying to get connected. So I guess the security was I couldn't get on the network. So that's my background. I've worked with pretty much all the different OSI model type stuff. I'm kind of focused on in the observability space today, dealing with data more than just the hardware. So that's the 40-second intro to me.
I love it. We're so excited to have you. I had the pleasure of meeting you in person in Austin a couple weeks back. So I very quickly saw your talk on data governance and knew that Brian and I needed to socialize with you here. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me because you asked all the good questions. So, sometimes when you're presenting, you really want to get people involved. And it's like if they sit there and stare at you, it's like, okay, what am I going to do now? So
Brian knows firsthand.
For asking questions.
I can be an obnoxious audience member. So as long as it came across as genuine, then I'm grateful and happy to help. But
yeah, we're excited for this one.
Yeah, before we kick off and kind of like start to wear our different hats, I would love to just hear from you, Perry. How do you define data governance when you're talking about it in your day-to-day?
Well, governance, and once again, there's a million documents out there talking about it, and it's actually a word that scares a lot of people. But it really shouldn't. You talk about governance, and it's like policies and procedures and rules, and I'm going to get in all this trouble if I'm doing it. But really, it's about from my point of view, is that knowing what's happening on your network. And this is kind of what I talked to you about. It's like, the rules say I have to know who is looking at what data, or else I'm going to be fined or get in big trouble or whatever. But my whole belief on that is that, isn't that a good idea anyway? Isn't that just the best practice? And you look at governance, and once we went through this too as a company. We went through a whole governance audit probably 4 years ago or whatever, and it's like, oh my God, they come in and you pulled people from different teams, and they had to actually go through and say, okay, what's your responsibility? What's your responsibility? What do we mean? And at the end of it, a lot of times people, it's like, I don't want to go through that. But if you kind of take a step back, and I said already, it's just best practices. It's just a good idea to know the who, what, when, where, why, and how of what the data is doing in your enterprise. That's as complicated as I think it is. And there's a lot of rules and policies because not everybody plays by the rules and policies. And depending on what department you are, what country you're in, what region you're in, or your corporate compliance requirements, there's carrots and sticks associated with that. I'll shut up now and let somebody else talk.
No, I like that. It's a bit of the way I also look at compliance. So like this is the minimum standard you have to meet, and there's a reason why those rules exist is because usually somebody's broken those, and we've realized, wait, that's not a good thing. People shouldn't do that. Let's put some controls in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So I like that perspective of data governance because it kind of fits into all of that really well from my perspective.
I think that's a tremendous point, and I think it's I shouldn't say this, but it's a shortcoming of some consultants that you bring in governance, because a lot of times they come and they start talking about regulations and stuff and potential fines and all that stuff. And I think if they flipped it on the other side and saying, this is stuff that you really want to know and understand, it's kind of like, you want to know where your kids are at night. You won't necessarily want to have the police go and arrest them if they're out. You want to know what they're doing. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but it works for me.
It sounds similar to how I work with clients 100%. Where absolutely there are definitely fines related with data breaches, and we have so many data privacy laws around the world and also data security laws. It can be helpful to occasionally be like, yeah, that's going to cost you this amount of money in the worst case scenario. On the other hand, though, sometimes it's really helpful about being like, hey, setting a strategy of what you have access to is actually just really good business because it helps companies set the stage for actually what they're trying to do. And so maybe that's how we can kind of like start talking about what we want to do today, where the goal for today's episode is really to do a tabletop exercise where each of us, Perry, Brian, and myself, are going to wear different hats, as you would say, as a pretend organization coming together saying that we've decided we want to set up a data governance strategy and we want to establish a data governance program. And this is the first time we're having this conversation, and we're coming in the room together. We have different stakeholders across ABC company coming together here and having a conversation about data governance and trying to depict what different teams might care about when you're coming up with this approach for your company.
All right. I think that's a great idea because, to your point, the different departments look at it differently, and as they should, because they're looking at the data for different purposes.
Yeah, so we're going to roll through, and I think we're going to let Brian kick it off, and he's going to represent marketing. And Perry and I will jump in if we have questions for marketing, but we're going to have Brian come in and kind of give us what are the concerns that are top of mind for the marketing team within the organization.
So from a marketing perspective, like we rule with data. The more data we have, the better. We want to have as much data about our customers, about our prospects, about the industry, about our competitors. The more we have, the more we can better understand how to put our message out there and who can hear it. You know, we want to get in people's faces. We want them to know we exist, and we want them to understand what we're doing, what we're all about. So we want to collect email addresses. We want to collect, people's mobile phone numbers so that we can send them SMS messages. We want to do cookies so that we can see where else they're going and be able to remember them as they come in, so that we can track them as they move through their journey with us, from the first time they visit our website to going to download that white paper, all the way to filling out a form that says, "Hey, I want to talk to sales. Call me and let's talk about this." Of course, we're aware of the fact that there are regulations that we have to abide by. We're an international company, so we have to deal with things like GDPR that are going to define how we can use that, what we can collect, what we have to say in order to collect that. So being able to, one, know what the right data is, and we definitely want to work with legal and compliance on that to make sure that we keep this above board. But we also want to be able to make sure that the systems in which we put that data help us abide by those rules, and make sure that if we say, "Hey, we're not going to share this data with any third parties, we're going to keep it completely to ourselves," that data will stay there, and then we have the controls in place that won't allow that data to be accidentally shared for some reason. So that there's a lot to that. We want to be able to collect as much as we can, but we don't want to put the company at risk, because we know that some of those legal fees when it comes to GDPR could be pretty steep, and we do not want to be we don't want to be the team that's responsible for a big fine.
All right, let me bring something up what you just said about tracking phone numbers and all that stuff. In a previous life, well, not life, way back, I was heavily involved in Wi-Fi, and we did a lot of stuff in the hospitality space, hotels and whatever. And we had this one chain, very well-known chain. What they wanted to do is be able to, either using their app on the phone or whatever, is when a high roller came in, I want to be able to identify them based on their cell information or based on that. And I want to be able to automatically alert, they just came on my Wi-Fi, they've been here before, I know them. I want to send a picture of that individual to the concierge, so he can walk up and say, "Hey, welcome, Mr. Correll. Nice to have you back here. How's everything doing with you?" And that's what they wanted to do. And it was kind of funny that it's like, could we do that? Yes, we absolutely could. But it never actually happened because of so many potential. They were actually starting it overseas in Europe. And there were so many legal hurdles that they finally said, never mind, we'll just go up and introduce ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and quite frankly, the reason why there's laws around that is because it's kind of creepy. Like, I don't know that I want to walk up and have somebody do that, but from a marketing perspective, we definitely want to do that kind of thing. Like, when they come to our website, we want to greet them as if we know them, if we do know who they are, and be able to serve up, "Hey, you last looked at this paper, maybe you want to go look at this paper as the next thing."
Yeah, and I do think, in general, I do think marketing and sales are organizations that have very similar data maximalization goals, where they want as much information as possible.
Yeah.
Which is why some of those guardrails that come out of compliance requirements like the GDPR have been established because some organizations, not ours, not the one we're talking about in our theoretical org, we're not in the business of doing that, but there are definitely other organizations that have tried to go to the extremes, such as that, Perry, that kind of terrifying example that you just highlighted. That keeps, if I'm speaking on behalf of compliance and legal, those are the stories that keep me up at night. So I think sales and marketing have similar goals where they want to have really high touch point. They want accurate, good data that involves and captures a lot of personally identifiable information, a lot of PII that goes beyond just, oh, I work for XYZ company and it's business information data, right? It's no, I work for XYZ company. My name is this, my email is this, I live here, I click this, my IP address is this. Screen recording is a really large thing for marketing organizations as well now, where they want the full user experience, where they want to basically see, how am I interacting with the website? What things did I click on? What pages did I spend, a longer time? And so marketing from a data governance perspective definitely has some of the concerns about being like, where is the boundary between where consent is and capturing as much data as possible?
No, that's so true. And, I've done a lot of stuff in the marketing space, and to kind of go beyond what both of you were talking about is that as you look at more web pages, the systems out there, the software out there can see what you're looking at, get some idea of what you're looking for, be able to direct you to different areas. And the whole idea is it's touch points. The more touch points you make, let's just be honest, the more likely you are to reach out and contact us. Contact the company, whatever happens to be. And if you're in there, you're in there 30 seconds, whatever, you're gone, no big deal. But if you come back, or if other people in your same organization, in your same domain come back, and you're looking at certain things, you're looking at, let's just say a firewall or something like that. If I'm a firewall company, I'm going to go, okay, they're looking to change, they're looking to update, there's an opportunity there, and maybe I can cold call this individual or whatever. Once again, and I think Malu, you said it, you got to be careful about too much, because then you'll definitely turn, hey, I saw you visit us, you looked at this, and it's like, whoa, I don't want to deal with these people. They know too much about me.
Yeah, we definitely get that. You go search for a thing on a storefront, and all of a sudden that's all the ads that you're served are about that one thing that you searched for. Is a legit concern. It's, to me, I know how it works, but that doesn't make it any less creepy. I don't want that happening, because to me that's showing, going back to Mila, your favorite question, in some one of those ways, I'm like, I'm losing the battle for privacy because they're seeing what I'm doing and they're sharing it with others and whatnot. But at the same time, as a marketing person, I want to serve up what that person most needs to see next. And you called out time on a particular web page is a huge one potentially, because if I read that entire page about that firewall, then yeah, that's a great indicator that I care about that, as opposed to, well, I clicked on that DLP solution, that data loss prevention solution, and was on the page for 10 seconds before I requested the next page. That means I'm not interested in that. And that's great information, to your point, that not only marketing could use, but sales can use as well. And so, yeah, there's a fine line, I think, between the creepy factor and the I'm getting a really good service because I'm getting exactly what I want and they're anticipating my needs. And so that's a really tough line to make there.
Do you think there's a generational difference as far as the customer in this case? Is that are there some people, older people, whatever, that's more annoying to them or upsetting to them than maybe a Gen Z or whatever the name is these days, that they expect that, whereas typically an older person, hey, that's too much.
I think
is there a difference?
In my opinion, there definitely is, because the expectations are different based on some people have grown up with nothing but cell phone technology or mobile phone technology out there and are used to being tracked in that way. But at the same time, I know people in the boomer generation who are like, I have nothing to hide, so let my information flow. They don't seem to care about the privacy aspect of things. So I don't know that there's a true through line there, but I think there's definitely some trends, probably.
All right. Well, marketing, we've gotten some really good insight from your team. Perry, you're representing information technology. So would you like to wear your IT hat and kind of fill us in on what are your concerns when we're building out our data governance strategy for the organization?
Before concerns, what my goal is, I control the data. And that data may be, I typically control IT related data, logs, alerts, that type stuff. But all the data in the enterprise is flowing through me at some point. You've got, your networking data, your IT data, but then also you got your enterprise data, which is maybe stuff that's nobody's really looking at one, but it's all flowing through me. And I'm challenged in two different areas. One is I want to be able to see it all. I want to be able to collect is the wrong word, but I want to be able to manage it all. But then I can get it. I can find different ways to get it. And if I got enough money, I can collect it all. But a lot of times I can't collect it all, but I'm responsible for it wherever it happens to be. And this kind of falls back on that compliance thing, is that, there's certain data I can control. I can capture it. It streams into me. I can store it in this bucket or this system of analysis or whatever. But there's probably 100 times more data that's sitting out on individual hosts, individual servers, individual environments that I don't necessarily have responsibility for, but I don't really have control over. I don't even know what it is. And it, got a consultant comes in for doing a compliance audit and whatever, and goes, how much data you got? I have no idea. I've got petabytes of data stretched across my enterprise. Well, how much of it has PII? I don't know. I don't have the time, the money, the effort to actually go out and examine all that data to find out what's in it. I don't have the money or the time or the licenses to bring that data in. So how do you expect me to control all that? And this is the conversations that we've had. I've talked to customers and stuff that they've had for compliance, is that my job initially, IT's job, is to smoothly let all the data go everywhere. That was 15 years, that was 30, 40 years ago. Then it's like, I can't do that anymore. Now I've got control of the data. I'm the manifold. I'm the traffic cop. But now my biggest challenge is, theoretically, I can secure it. But, Brian, you're chief marketing officer. You want all this data. What am I allowed to give you? Obviously beyond the point of what compliance regulations and rules and all that is stuff, what should you be allowed to see? Should you allowed to see PII information? No, of course not.
Yeah.
But then you go to, what is PII information? Is it a first name? Is it an email? Is it an IP address? Is it a MAC address? From a black and white world, it's all that. It's anything. It's what anybody thinks is PII. I can figure out who you are just by, where your Wi-Fi connected to. I know it's in this building. I know it's in this area. So I know you're probably in the marketing organization. So I can do that. So my challenge is, who do I allow? What I go back to the whole compliance thing is who, what, when, and where, and why. Is that where's all this data coming from? Who's allowed to see it? How do I control it? How do I filter it? Can I throw it away? I'm gonna throw this to Milo. You're kind of on the security side of the house. Can I get rid of this data? Do I have to keep it for years?
Well,
and
before
the answer is never. Nobody ever gets an answer to that. They say, well.
Yeah. Well, and related to that, before Milo gives an answer to that, I want to ask the question of, do you feel like we're in danger because of the amount of data? Is there a threshold in which we get to the point where we say we're at more risk because we have all this data? And if we don't start to cull some of this data out of our environment, we're going to be in a more risky position than if we kept it all forever.
That's actually a great question, and that's something that I work at in my job, is that we're seeing data growth in the enterprise at a 28% CAGR every year, compounded actual growth. That's how much more data, because it started with the whole Internet of Things, that everything that you plug in can generate data. And I like that idea. It's like, I got enough. I'm going to throw this stuff away. I don't want to see it anymore. And one of the things that we like to see is that a lot of this data is the most useless data in the world until something happens and it becomes the most important data in the world. So it's like, if it's older than 3 years, throw it away. I don't care about it. But then I have an event that comes across, and there was company a few years ago that they had been hacked into for like 5 years, and they didn't know about it. So then they had to go back and say, well, I threw that away. You can't. How long do you keep it? I don't know. There is no good answer to that. Obviously, regulatory requirements, if you have to keep it for 5 years, you have to keep it for 5 years, but you have to keep everything? I don't get paid enough to make these decisions. I'm the CIO. I don't get paid enough to make these decisions. Because somebody's going to go to jail. No, only kidding.
Well, Perry, before I answer your question on the data retention side and enforcing policies, because it is a part of our data governance strategy.
Yes.
I would say what I was really happy to hear you say for information technology when you're wearing that hat of the IT story and culture has really changed from a conversation about data access to now data control. And so to me, that was a really useful distinction of 100% IT, and also within startups, even not even talking about the history of like where we've come from a data governance perspective, also just like organizations, when they start small, they start scrappy, and IT's function is really to be like, everybody just needs access to everything. And then as the organization matures, the team gets bigger, it's suddenly like, well, we need to pull that back. And now we're starting to implement access controls. And then suddenly, generally, it's like, oh, and now we're implementing compliance standards, because suddenly we got our first deal that requires a SOC 2, right? Or something like that. That's usually how the story works, at least in the technology side. So especially for organizations that are less regulated. But if you build out the strategy, we're behind the queue because we're coming in as an organization and we don't have a strategy yet. And we've heard from you that we have a ton of data. So from IT's perspective, I think IT is a really good complement to follow marketing, because marketing is coming from like a data maximalization with consent and regulatory requirements. IT is coming from similarly, where IT needs to have access to everything in order to do their job effectively, but also has the same regulatory requirements, if not stricter ones, because they have security requirements that marketing doesn't have necessarily. So IT and security might sometimes have a more challenging job actually implementing these types of strategies, because they're also the ones coming in with, what do we mean when we say zero trust? And what do we mean when we're coming in with all of these security controls that my team compliance is pushing down the pipeline?
Now, it's funny because, once again, I've been involved in networking quite some time. My first computer was a desktop that you had to configure it to use it. You had to know DOS. I'm telling my age there a little bit. But at the very beginning, it was all about connectivity. And within a very short period of time, it went to segmentation for security, not necessarily for security, but just to separate different traffic loads in different areas. But it's very, very important to do that, because segmentation, that starts to get into the whole compliance thing, is that who gets to see what. And once again, when I first started, we had an IT department. I mentioned this a little before. Now we've got IT, you got SRE, you got IT ops, SecOps, DevOps, whatever. And all of them.
So many acronyms.
Exactly. And then you get Sec DevOps, and then, but all these people are looking for the same data a lot of times, but maybe in different formats, because they're running it into different system of analysis to gather different information. So even though a lot of the times they're looking for the same data, they might, some of it will aggregate it, some of it will enrich it, and some of it will, sample it. But it's a challenge to figure out what I'm going to do with all this stuff for who. And everybody wants more. There's only one of me.
Okay, well, I will follow Perry's lead then. If I'm speaking on behalf of compliance, I will say where Perry said that IT controls the data, compliance controls the policies. And so even this exercise that we're doing today is most likely coming from my team's mandate of coming up with a data governance strategy, not just good business, but is tied to certain security requirements. I think I had mentioned earlier when we kicked off this episode that FedRAMP NIST 853 actually requires a data governance program as one of the controls under the program management control areas. So this is coming actually from our organization's push to go become FedRAMP compliant. So that's where we're here today. So that's why we're a little bit behind the curve. It's because we've decided to add a new standard and secure our systems to a different level. So with that in mind, my concerns come very much related to why there's GRC, there's governance, risk, and compliance, policy, procedure, implementation. So for me, my concerns today are, what is our data management policy, which should cover off data backups, data retention, data classification, some of the main concerns we already have implemented within our organization, but we want those really codified in a policy that we're all on the same page with potentially different caveats for different teams, right? IT needs clearer system access than marketing does, and sales needs less access than marketing does. But
They won't tell you that.
Sales.
Well, it depends on the data, I would say, but yeah.
It depends on the information. They can have plenty of access to Salesforce or our CRM. But, of thinking through, we also need a data access policy, and then we need an associated procedure. So I'm coming in from compliance saying, one, we need a policy, we need a data governance policy that covers off all of these large elements of, creating a data inventory. That's part of the procedure requirements that's coming out of this. So because we're global, we have GDPR compliance requirements that also require us to maintain just an inventory of what we have. So when we say, what is PII for our company, we're super clear on what the threshold is so that IT and marketing don't get into the riffraff and confusion between those two teams, that we're setting the standard today of making sure we have a policy, we have an associated procedure. So anything that my team is codifying for the policy for this group, we're then all each in charge of our associated procedures, and they will be different. So we're coming through, that'll be our follow-up for future conversations of what does that mean? Brian's team needs a data subject access request procedure for their compliance requirements. IT needs a data retention policy and then an associated procedure because, Perry, to your point earlier, we do actually have limitation requirements. So we can't only hold on to data indefinitely anymore. Because we work in the EU, we also have some stricter EU laws that compete with our US counterparts that do actually require us to implement automated procedures to delete data that we don't need anymore. That will be said. I'll have legal speak to the actual requirements here shortly when they have the floor, but we will work with legal and outside counsel to set that standard to making sure that we're not deleting logs that we might need in the case of a litigation hold. So that's kind of where my team is at. So we're really coming from, we want this to be a structured framework that all of our team players, we're all on board, we all have the same goal, but we're coming in from my team is implementing the structure here, but your teams will all have many action items following our conversation today.
So
well, let me ask you a question on it. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to ask, Milo, as you look at this from a compliance perspective and setting some of those standards and I guess somewhat project managing the whole thing, are we as individual department heads waiting for you to kind of coordinate what we're going to do, or do we need to start coming up with ideas of what we think our policies need to be, what kind of processes we need to put in place for our areas of control? So with me in marketing, do I need to start reading up on GDPR and understanding exactly which pieces of data and start laying out all those pieces of data, or are you going to come to us and walk us through that?
Ideally, compliance comes with the initial starting point. That's usually the most effective way to start this, about being hey, our baseline requirements are this. Let's come in. So our team will come in with the baseline policy about being this is what the standard requires. Let's now customize it to making sure that it applies to your team so that marketing does have a very clear guidance on what actually applies to their team versus what applies to Perry's team in IT. So compliance generally should come with the baseline standard here. Every organization does this differently. There's not one size fits all. That's actually what's super frustrating even about a control standard coming out of a framework like FedRAMP, like NIST 853. The only requirement is that we have a data governance strategy and program. How we set up the policy is completely up to us. So if we do have certain teams, data architecture probably wants to set their own policy and standard first, and compliance will work with them. So it kind of is a per team basis, but I will recommend that we split up. Compliance will be driving this as the project manager for this program and pushing it through the organization and working with the individual stakeholders one-on-one to making sure that I'm not coming in with a super strict policy that doesn't work for your team, but works for security.
Cool. Good question about that. You got to build a compliance structure, compliance policy, but you coming in from the outside, you have no idea what data I have. And if I don't share that with you, so I've got to buy into this. All of us do, because that's the only way you're actually going to know what's out there, what we're really doing, what's going on with it. So it's more than just rules. It's kind of is it worse to not have a policy or violate the policy?
Here's what's really grateful for me, because we're a EU company. I have the benefit that I do actually have a requirement now legally, that legal will help me back up here, but legally we're required to maintain a data asset inventory. which means that IT, you are going to have to spend a good amount of time inventorying what we have, because that's kind of step one. We can't figure out how to manage what we have if we don't know what we have. So we're tying this into asset management controls and coming at this from like a, let's work together, compliance and IT, to do a data inventory audit. We might even, because this is a top-down approach, the executive team might even approve a data discovery tool to help us so that we're not manually doing this, because that would be quite the frustrating exercise. So that is where I will say that compliance will come forward with hopefully some budget approval, because this is a top-down initiative.
You say a data management tool or a data. What about AI? Can AI help me find my data and find PII or find certain types of data? Or is it the opposite? Is it that AI's got to learn what this is first before I can use it? You know, it's the chicken and the egg stuff as far as AI is concerned. Does governance help drive AI, or can AI help governance, or is it a little bit of everything?
I'm going to say it depends if the tool is approved by compliance.
It depends.
Can AI
approve
that tool?
I'm sorry, I missed that, Brian.
Can AI approve that tool?
That's
all the way down.
That's beyond the scope of this conversation.
Oh, okay.
I love it.
And we're going to wrap our special edition episode of Socializing Security on data governance and the different team approach that myself, Brian, and Perry are doing in this episode. So before we queue up and hear from the security team, we will take a break and see you next week. So we'll dive in next week exactly where we left off, in the middle of this conversation, where security will come in and let us know what their concerns are when we're building a data governance strategy. Thanks for socializing with us.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.